home game in the state of Michigan in decades. Chris Villar, Michigan News Network.
102.7 WMOM 832. Good morning, West Michigan. Sunshine, blue skies for your Monday. And live in the studio with us, Mayor Barnett. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for coming in as well. Mitch Foster in the studio as well. Mitch, how you doing today?
Good, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Let's chat about City Council tonight, 6 o'clock, right? Okay, let's talk about some of the things on the agenda. First, you have the officers that are at our public schools, and not just our public schools too, being able to protect all of our students. But on the agenda tonight is the police resource officer. Mayor Barnett, we'll start with you. Why is this such a need? And I would assume this day and age, when we hear about all of these incidents across the country and around the world, that factors into this. But is it bigger than that?
I really think it is. School security is critical. It's very important. It's important for kids and parents to know that their students can go to school and safety is not an issue. But more than that, I think it's important for students to have opportunity to form relationships with law enforcement. I just think, I know Ludington's been doing it for 20-some years, and it's just paid dividends in terms of, relationships and that kind of thing. And frankly, it gives kids an option of things they might want to do as they grow older for a profession.
Absolutely. Is this different, Mitch, in regards to funding? Is this part of a city responsibility? Is it more of a school responsibility? Where does this land?
I think it's a shared responsibility in all reality. We all want to see kids feel safe and families feel safe and school districts feel safe. And so the school resource officer position, as the mayor alluded to, has been around for a while. We've just never really had a concrete agreement like this. And so that's what we're putting in place. The other piece of this that's kind of interesting is under state statute, the crossing guards that are over at Tinkham and Washington, technically the city should pay for those, and so we've looped those into this agreement so that we can cover what we should be covering, and the school district is helping assist with the payment for the SRO, which is currently Austin Morris, who's been doing a phenomenal job. And the one thing I would say is, I think a lot of places are doing this reactively to the recent issues that they've had at school districts across the country. Ludington's been doing this for a while, and as the mayor said, this is a proactive approach. You want to have kids feel safe around law enforcement. You want to have families feel that way, whether it's a future position or something else. But it's also the idea of, they can reach out to those kids that we might not know are having trouble and might not be going to the counselor, but they can see them because they're there every day. And so it's a proactive approach for sure.
Have you, in the past few years, and you've been, the resource officer has been there for how long would you say? I mean,
2001 is when the first officer went into the schools.
Okay, and in that particular time till now, is there concrete statistics that you can report to the community that this has dropped, this has gotten better, so on and so forth?
I think one of the issues traditionally has been truancy and making sure students are there and ready to learn, able to be in an environment where they can learn, have the things necessary to learn. I know that the school resource officer over the years has been, they've had the opportunity to work with parents, make sure that especially the teen students that like to sleep in a little bit longer, make it to school, able to work with the staff. And so I think truancy is one of those. I think a lot of the other stuff is just anecdotal, the things that you just notice that, you don't know what you don't know, what didn't happen because they were there. I think we can all agree that it just provides for a safer environment.
And then the Sheriff's Department is part of this too. Mitch, let's talk about that because I believe, and is this correct, Mayor, your son is one of our resource officers too, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. He's a school resource officer for Mason County Sheriff's Office.
Okay, and so break this down. The funding wise, you had mentioned the crossing guards, and that's a factor into it when crossing guards are used in certain situations.
Correct. Yep. So the way that it works, at least for our school resource officer that covers the high school and middle school, is the school district pays for the 9 months that they are working over there. We keep that person on as a full-time officer year-round. So the city gets essentially 3 quarters of the year paid for, and then the final quarter we use that officer to fill in shifts, maybe do other community events, community engagement type work. And then we subtract out the cost for those crossing guards. Again, the county has different arrangements with the school district, and I know that they're working on both looking at MCC, possibly MCE, or the ESD as other locations, or Covenant Christian. So, I think this is an expanding resource that they're looking at across the county and frankly across the country. But between former Chief Barnett, now Mayor Barnett, and Sheriff Kim Cole, I think all of our law enforcement agencies here in Mason County have been trying to look at this on a proactive, positive end. And so I think that's where we're going to end up.
From an accounting standpoint, could it get muddy, or is it pretty straightforward?
Well, I think, one of the things that we tried to figure out this year was how do we write a contract that is protecting both parties. And one of those things is the school wanted to make sure there were actual dollar amounts in there and not percentages.
Okay.
It's X percent of the officer's wage on every given year. So we did just a flat dollar amount with a escalator every year based on CPI. That makes it a lot easier for them to budget for it. It makes us understand it a lot easier on our end as well.
All right.
Yeah.
And I know Mark had mentioned how important this is, but from your standpoint, from the city manager's seat, how important is this?
Very. I prescribe to the idea that we are safer now than we ever have been in the history of humankind. However, with that being said, this isn't always just about safety. It's also about building a community. And so these SRO officers and these positions really build that community and include the school district in on that. What I will say, and I think the mayor alluded to this a little bit, we can't prove a negative. We can't prove and provide statistics on the number of school shootings that were prevented or the number of issues that have been prevented. But I can tell you in conversations, again, anecdotally with Officer Morris or previous to him, Officer Skiba, these positions really do make a difference in those school districts.
Is there anything in regards to this subject, and then we'll move on? I'll ask both of you this question. Is there anything that the school resource officer is in need of, approached the city council, the city in general? And Mark, I'll ask you the second part of that question is, what do you foresee in the future that they would need? So Mitch, could you take that first one of immediate needs and then future needs?
Yeah, so what we're looking at actually right now, the Public Safety Committee will be reviewing, so as a part of the SRO, we've always just had them use a squad car. One of the things we've looked at moving forward with Chief Jones now in place is he's worked with Officer Morris, and now Officer Morris is working with the high school kids to select a new design for a squad car. So it'll have some Ludington feel to it, or Ludington High School and Middle School feel to it. So it'll have the O all over it, and those sorts of things. And then it's going to go to the vote of the students. To select that. And so having a squad car that he can take around, or our SRO can take around to different school events where they can acknowledge, oh, that's the SRO because look at all the Ludington Oriole stuff all over it. That's a big thing, and I think it'll help him kind of integrate even more into the school area.
All right, good point there. Mark's similar question, and that second part of that is, what do you see resource-wise that these resource officers need for the future?
Well, I think all the departments that are doing this now, Ludington included, is wanting to really make sure that the officers that are assigned to the schools have the adequate training, have the adequate equipment. Those are just day-to-day nuts and bolts kind of things, and I know City Council wants that as well. So I think that those are things, but I think going back to the squad car concept and anything that can help identify. I mean, team's important, right? I mean, if you're a U of M fan or a Michigan State fan, you're wearing their stuff, and so I think it's important from a team building perspective for the students to see the impact that they've had on the car. They've been able to touch that idea and own it. So I think that's pretty important too. And I also, one of the things I know the school resource officers would say if they were here is that they really desire, they really covet to have more and more buy-in and more teamwork as it relates to parents and students. So I think that's important too.
Do you think that message is being pushed out there enough, or is there a disconnect between the parent and the school resource officer?
Nope, I don't think there's a disconnect. I think it's just every year you get new students and consequently you get new parents, and so it's an opportunity just to keep pushing that message and keep encouraging that teamwork. Because really the school resource officer is there as much to support parents and their students as they are staff. So I think it's just a really great collaboration.
All right. We're talking with Mayor Barnett here in the studio, as well as City Manager Mitch Foster from Ludington. Let's talk about, in that same topic, and then we'll transition to a few others, is that tonight, after the first meeting last 2 weeks ago about body cams and other technology, That is going to come up for a vote, I believe, tonight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Mitch, what? That was a quick turnaround, partly because there was a contract already in place.
Exactly.
And what's the next steps there?
Yeah, so at this point in time, we've got an ordinance that will hopefully approve all 3 contracts, or actually 4 contracts with Axon, and that deals with body cameras, a special license for body cameras, in-car cameras, and then tasers. And so this ordinance tonight, if approved by City Council, will then allow these contracts to move forward as is.
All right, and so up until this point, there's body cams, but they're shared.
Yep.
Is this going to expand the number of them?
Yeah, so with this contract, it did allow for every single officer to have their own body camera. And so essentially when they get off shift, they take their body camera and they just plug it into this little kind of charging port that also downloads all the data too.
Okay.
Yep.
Mayor Barnett, when you were chief of police, did you utilize a lot of these resources? We see it in the news all the time that body cams can be good and can be bad in situations. Your opinion and thoughts on this?
Well, body cameras in general, I think, and video in-car cameras are, it's great when you have the information on there. It's not so great when you do, because then people become suspicious because it's not. Mm-hmm. I think one of the concerns is that officers are not preoccupied worrying about camera angle, and instead are concerned and addressing the issue as they need. They need to be tactically sound. Maybe that doesn't always create the best camera angle. In-car cameras. We had, of course, we had those when I was there. We had tasers, but in particular with the tasers, we had enough to equip the 5, the people that were on the road. But if everyone was in like in a Macker situation, not everybody had a less lethal option in regards to tasers. So it's important. I think it's a good step forward for everyone, each officer, to have their own taser and their own body cam.
Is there any conversation with our new police chief, Jones, in regards to training? Because Mayor Barnett brings up a very good point, is that if something were to happen, and in rural communities, in any community out there, but we see something that happens, the public then is engaged in it, wants to see what happened, and if it's blocked by an arm or other, the angle is wrong, it's facing the ground, so on and so forth. That creates, as he mentioned, kind of that, what really happened, and everybody else's thought process on that. Do we have any conversations going on in regards to that training? Is it an issue, I guess?
No, not in general. There will be circumstances where a case like that will happen, Chris, where you might have a body camera that accidentally gets turned off or gets knocked off the person. But in general, the officers, there's a policy in place in their policy manual talking about when they turn on the camera and when they turn it off. And it's typically anytime they are called to a scene or have any sort of public interaction, they have to turn that body camera on. If there is a circumstance where something happens, that's a follow-up by either the captain, the chief, or the on-duty sergeant if it's just a road patrol officer, and those things get corrected. But just like any profession, you're going to run into issues where somebody, essentially forgets the policy, they're in the heat of the moment, something else happens. We just want to make sure that the officers learn from those mistakes, move forward in a positive direction.
The heat of the moment, that while you were talking, that was what was I thinking. Mayor Barnett, when that officer is called and racing to that scene, lights on, speeding as fast to the emergency situation, how do they remember all of those items? I know that's it's part of it, but there's adrenaline and everything going through their minds. Okay, what am I going to show up and see? How do you remember to turn that body camera on? Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah. I mean, certainly the way to do it is repetition and training and that kind of thing to get your motor skills, large motor skills to just function and activate and do the things that you needed to do. It'd be the same as, a rough analogy would making sure that they remember to remove their firearm in the event that there's a deadly or an active shooter or something like that. I mean, that's an added step, but it's a necessary step relative to safety. And I think body cameras are a necessary step. It's just that training needs to be there in order to make sure that the officer remembers to do that. But again, I mean, it needs to be understood that there are limits to the technology relative to the officer's safety, and there's a difference where the body camera is mounted, and sometimes the officer has to, just speaking from a tactical position, there's times when an officer needs to make less of a profile, and so they can have their eyes see what's going on, but other things not so much. So I just think that, as City Manager Foster said, there are limits, and there are things that sometimes will happen, but I think all in all it's a good thing.
All right. If you're just joining us, Mayor Barnett in the studio with us, City Manager Mitch Foster. Let's talk about something that's a resolution tonight, and that is, and as we go into this, let's talk about the reasons why, what the previous position was in regards to community and public comment. There's a public comment section before the meeting, right? You do the introduction, pledge allegiance, prayer, and then you have that public comment where citizens have 3 minutes, right? 3 minutes to chat and express themselves, and then at the end of the meeting as well. I guess my first question before the resolution is, has this been a good part of these meetings? Obviously, it's part of almost every jurisdiction and city council meeting across the land.
Right.
But is it productive? Is it just the grievances that you hear constantly? Is there some praise in there, I guess, too?
The praise is one that would be really great sometimes, but in all reality, that's not why people are coming to city council meetings. They're there to express a feeling on an issue that's either before council or something they want council to consider, and so a lot of those times are things that they need to have addressed. However, there are those folks that do come to give praise to council or to staff, which is great to hear. But in general, they're very productive and positive comments and criticisms that we can at least take and address moving forward. And again, we have those two public comment periods during the meeting, but also during any kind of public hearing. That's also another opportunity where people are able to give their feedback on very specific issues that are being addressed as well.
Do you think many people, sometimes when I'm listening to the public comment, I think, man, this is something that they should bring up in that meeting. But in most cases, it's not. And the reason is that you want to bring it down into a subcommittee. It could prolong the meeting. What are the reasons? Obviously, you have your own agenda. Not your own agenda, but there's an agenda. But does that happen from time to time where there is something that is brought up in public comment that is addressed during a meeting?
Yeah, you will have some times where, especially during the first public comment, because that's the easiest one to tackle from there, where a resident or a visitor will bring something up during public comment and someone will nudge me, or a counselor will get nudged, or the mayor will, to say, all right, let's address that later on during, counselor comments or city manager report, something along those lines. And so then we try to do that. But more often, because these things are just kind of spur of the moment or, planned by the visitor or the person speaking at the public comment, we don't always have the time to prepare to give a good, accurate response. And so that's why most of the time we don't engage. Plus, as you indicated, the back and forth conversation just doesn't happen. Yep,
absolutely. We're visiting with Mitch Foster, Mayor Barnett here. The resolution is take us through what it was and what it's going to be. Do you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah. So how this all got started is we had some issues with decorum, not decorum, but process as to how a member of the public is identified and acknowledged to speak during public comment. If we remember back to the marijuana items, we had a number of folks come forward to speak on that issue, and they would give kind of full name, address, or organization, or at least where they were located, so that council could understand, all right, this person lives in the city of Ludington or represents somebody with the city of Ludington versus this person represents, the Manistee or a business up in Kalkaska, whatever it may be. And so as we've kind of moved forward, we've had some issues with kind of that acknowledgement piece. And so between myself, Mayor Barnett, and Attorney Ross Hammersley, we've been trying to work on some sort of a resolution to address public comment. And that's allowed under the Open Meetings Act for us to do that, and it's actually encouraged so that there can be almost guide rails for public comment and how it goes down. And so the first resolution was a bit over the top, a bit draconian, and aggressive in what could or could not be said. We believe, and after receiving comment from, I think, just under a majority of counselors between meetings, trying to get some direct comment to myself and the attorney, I think we've gotten a good draft that will be laid down tonight for city councilors to consider. But again, it'll be a good discussion because I think there's still some disagreement as to how and what it looks like.
So take us through, Mayor Barnett, what changes we could see as part of this.
Well, I don't know that it's a change, but it's just more of a making people more aware of it. That the person, when they come up to the podium, they're asked to speak, mention or identify themselves by name, street address, and whether or not, and city residence, and whether or not there's a affiliation with some organization that they might be participating in. In other words, so for example, go back to Mitch's comment just a minute ago, where somebody has, they say, "Hey, I live in Ludington, and I'm for marijuana dispensaries." But if they don't disclose the fact that they're part of a business operation in Manistee, then that doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily the most transparent of situations. So the idea of mentioning their affiliation is important as well. And really, it's the whole idea is behind it is transparency, so that people understand, people that are viewing online, people that are viewing live, the city councilors that represent them, all understand what it is that they're talking about, and get as much information as they can to make an informed decision.
What about pushback on this? Somebody might say, "Well, you're violating my rights. I don't have to disclose this to you." What's that conversation then like?
Well, I think that it's important for people to realize that they want transparency out of government, but the transparency needs to be present in that setting as well, so that people understand that there's no hidden interests or anything like that that's going to misuse public funds. And so, to me, that's an important part of it. Okay, so as a practical matter, the person comes up, said, "I'm Mark Barnett, live at 602 North Lakeshore Drive. I want to, I'm not affiliated with anybody, and I'm a resident of the city of Ludington." I said, and then the mayor would say, "Okay, Mr. Barnett, you have 3 minutes. You're recognized," or whatever the wording is there, and that they would recognize, make their comments, and then the next person would come up. So there's kind of a introduction, a recognition, and then the public comment.
All right, and should that, because obviously if anybody has been at a city council meeting or watched a city council meeting, there are some moments where there is some tension there. What happens now, Mitch, if there is the rejection of following that procedure? What happens?
So if the resolution is approved by council in any form or fashion, and again, a member of the public, whether a resident or non-resident or visitor, does not follow that, the chair, who is either the mayor or the presiding officer, could rule them out of order and ask them to sit down. If it becomes too contentious and aggressive, the sergeant of arms, who is typically the police chief, could escort them out. We never want it to get to that point, because really it's just trying to apply a singular rule or group of rules to all folks that are, or guidelines that are applying to all folks that are speaking. And I think the easy one for me, especially going off of what the mayor just stated, is if someone were to just come up and say they live in the city of Ludington or live in Ludington, that incorporates all addresses under the 49431 zip code. I mean, that could be people out in Hamlin, that could be people down in PM Township. From my perspective, I would think that city councilors would want to know more specifically who is living within the city, or is who living within their ward even, versus you're living in the same zip code. And I think that's part of this conversation. There are some other pieces that can be adjusted, based on what is disorderly conduct and those sorts of things. But I think this is probably one of the pieces that is most important for some city councilors.
And it doesn't mean that somebody within or without that doesn't live within the city can't address council, right?
Exactly.
They can still do that.
No, and that's kind of the point is, what? If you've got somebody that's visiting Ludington and has a different perspective, city council can also look at that. I mean, that's half the reason why you do like city exchanges, is you want someone that has a fresh eye on Ludington to come in and give you some criticism, just like we would want to do the same thing with that community. And so, yeah, I mean, everybody is welcome, but there's also a responsibility when you attend these meetings to abide by the rules that the governing body sets. And so that is whatever city council decides to do tonight or in the future.
And my last question in regards to this topic, and obviously it's going to be discussed at city council, and there will be some conversation from the councilor, from the city council. have you, with the city attorney, exhausted this in regards to preventing the city from any sort of suit? I know that's such a generic question because you don't know, how people will go.
Right.
But I know that there's people that have said, I want everybody to just get along and this, things to not happen where it's a contentious event every city council meeting.
Right.
Where does the city stand in regards to that position?
In the resolution itself, it states and cites the specific statute and code within the Michigan statutes that essentially allows city council to create its own rules for the governing of the meetings, and so this is well within those bounds. Even some of the more draconian and aggressive rules that the attorney first drafted were allowed under statute and have passed muster under case law. And so it is our belief that we're okay no matter what. But council may have a feeling of trying to be a little more lenient to start off with, and then if issues pop up, then that's a different story or conversation. Or do the opposite, where you're a little bit more aggressive off the bat, and then you can become a little bit more lenient as you move forward with these rules. And again, these things are not set in stone. You're not writing them on the 10 Commandments here. We're writing a resolution that council can change at any moment in time in any meeting as they see that circumstances change.
All right. We're chatting with Mitch Foster, City Manager of Ludington, Mayor Barnett this morning. Two final topics to chat about real quick is the pensions and the state. We've had conversations where and if anybody, I grew up in northern Michigan. We live in rural communities. We find that bigger cities, the southeast side of the state, they tend to get a bit more attention. Do they get more funding? Are we here in the Ludington area, in West Michigan? Do we get kind of sacrificed a little bit there, and do we get enough funding for these programs?
Yeah. So I liken this to the idea that some people complain about, which is that we reward bad behavior. And that's exactly what the state does in most circumstances. If you look at the circumstances surrounding Flint, Benton Harbor, and others on the lead line situation, their service got so bad that they had lead in their water. And so what the state did is put a ton of money into those communities so they no longer have to have lead lines. It replaced all their lines. The city of Ludington still has to spend $500,000 a year to replace all of our lead lines. Because we have never had a lead problem, they won't give us any additional dollars. It's very odd the way that the state almost incentivizes bad behavior. Pensions are very similar now. The state passed a bill last year that is going to give $750 million to communities that are funded under 60% for their pension systems. That original bill had $250 million going to communities that had at least 60% funding, which the city of Ludington, both of our pension systems are above 60%, one's over 70% even. But because we aren't a bad performing community on our pension system, we aren't going to have any assistance or help from the state government. Again, I'm not one to look for handouts, but when you are already handing out the dollars and trying to assist these communities to get to a better place financially, it should be more equitably and equally treated across the board, and not just focused on those folks that are not performing or not practicing good politics or policies. And so tonight, the City Council will be considering a resolution to essentially ask the state and pass it along to Representative Vanderwall and Senator Bumstead to make sure that they understand that we all believe that this needs to be something that is addressed statewide and not just with a handful of communities.
And the funding for the pensions will continue if they reject it.
Oh yeah, well the state will continue to push forward the funding to these folks under 60%. The city will continue to fund our own pensions through multiple means. This is just asking for a bit of assistance to try to make all of our pension systems whole and not just a handful.
All right, we'll look forward to following up on that. Vandalism continues to happen from time to time here and there within the city. We heard over the weekend one of the porta-johns tipped over, bathrooms vandalized and such. Although I will say that it hasn't been there hasn't been as many comments and conversations lately. So is there an update that we can pass on to the community in regards to that?
The police department is especially looking at these more recent issues. I believe we've dealt with the previous situation as best as we can. With the police department trying to do some investigations as to how to deal with these things moving forward. The one thing, that I think we're finding over and over again is, we've got to find some way to ingrain a sense of community with everybody. Mm-hmm. Pick up trash when you're walking home. Point it out to other people. Recognize that these are public facilities that whether it's you, the resident, the taxpayer, or your parents, or someone else is paying taxes to maintain. The more that you damage it, the more that you cause issues, the more it costs you long term in taxes and the like. Or those tax dollars can't go to something else that's more beneficial. And I think the idea that it's just a public facility, I don't own it, is a really short-sighted perspective that we've all got to get around. We all are in this community together, and the more that we can all maintain it together, the better it'll be.
And that example was something that you personally dealt with, I think, last week in regards to picking up trash that a resident didn't want to take care of. And we should be able to, you took care of it, but it's important to look out for the community. And Mayor Barnett, I think that's something that we have to do, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as Mitch said, the city belongs to everyone that lives here. We all play a role. There's rules in place, there's laws in place to govern activity. There's rules against breaking stuff that belongs to everybody, and for good reason. But the reality of it is that we wish and we hope that everyone will take an active ownership role and maintain the beauty that it's Ludington. So anyway, I think it's important that the community does this as a whole, just as crime prevention and all many other things that are happening. The community has a major role in all of those situations.
All right, and then my final question, and I believe this is this coming up tonight, is that Scottville for their fall festival, they want to work with the city of Ludington a little bit, right?
No, Chamber of Commerce.
Chamber of Commerce.
Yep.
Okay, and so that's something that we'll explore probably here in the near future in regards to that, and those conversations with Amber Township, Scottville, Pierre Marquette. There's more conversation happening these days to work together in regards to kind of making things seamless between the townships and the city, right?
Oh yeah. Mayor Barnett and myself we've got to schedule our next lunch meeting with folks along the corridor and west, kind of the urbanized area of the county, just to kind of share what's going on, talk about any items that we can cooperate on or collaborate on, and we're trying to do that almost quarterly. So just to kind of keep lines of communication open, the city of Ludington, we've got city councilors going to Hamlin Township meetings, PM Township, the county, not city of Scottville because they're the same night. I think Amber Township, maybe LMTA, just so that we can have a presence at all of these other community meetings so that we can share what's going on with us and maybe we can hear what's going on in those communities as well.
All right. Sounds like good information. Anything we forgot to talk about? I know we dove into a lot here, but city council meeting tonight, 6 p.m. At the city council chambers there. But anything that we missed this morning?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. Mayor Barnett as well?
I think we're good.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, guys, for coming in.
Thanks
as
for your
always.
time.
Thank you.
Absolutely. 9:06 here on 102.7 Mom FM. If you missed any of this segment, you can watch it in its entirety on our Facebook page as well as our YouTube channel. Check that out when you can. And if you have a question, certainly comment in the comment section there on something that we can follow up in the future. It is 9:06 news and weather coming your way next on 102.7. It is WMOM.
Thanks for making us